tell us, when did you first get the idea to pivot completely and go into grief work? And um, did you have that
Yes,
idea? Like,
it really, well, it was interesting. It was sort of a multi-phase. And I've listened to, there are a lot of great books on grief and storytelling. I realize like we tell a lot of stories to ourselves and about ourselves and what's happened. And I think your narrative sort of shifts over time, and there's this movement towards David Kessler wrote a book. It was at the sixth straight he talks about the meaning making stage of
yeah.
grief. So I think some years like en route to working on that meaning making. Pretty soon, within a couple of years after starting to attend the Children's Grief Center in Mississippi, I found myself joking, I'm going to move back to Kentucky and start this grief center. I'd worked in scholarly publishing for 25 years. I'd never wanted to do anything else. I thought this isn't, I would never change careers. And then about the fifth time I said this, I'm like, oh, maybe, am I serious? Why do I keep saying this?
Yeah.
So I know it was like again, I'm kind of slow on the uptake. Like my body is trying to signal, my unconscious mind is trying to signal all these things to me. So I called the folks at the Grief Center, and that I asked if I could come volunteer with them.
Oh,
So she went back to group. And I needed to go on a separate night because, again, I was volunteering and we needed to keep it all separate. So basically what this meant is we might as well have like set up a camp bed over at the grief center because we were there like 2 nights a week. She was doing her group. She hung out in the office and did homework while I was volunteering, with the other kids on a different night. And so I did that for a year and I loved it. It
yeah.
was, I remember my mom at the time asked, like, isn't that depressing? And I said, when it's not your own child that you're shepherding through this, it is a completely different experience. And that place was the happiest and most peaceful place that I knew,
Yeah.
counterintuitively. The grief center is like where we felt safest and most drawn to.
Yeah.
So I kind of knew by the time we left Jackson 4 years after his death. I came back to Kentucky and I was still in publishing, but my heart knew that was really the next step. And then it was my mom's death that watching my daughter struggle this time
Right.
without a center, I'm like, okay, she
Uh,
needs this. It does not exist.
yeah.
And part of me thought, if that school year was like a dumpster fire, it was horrible. The teachers really struggled to figure out how to support her because, they didn't know a lot about the prior loss. So all they're hearing is her
Mm.
grandmother died, and they're like, why is she falling apart? This is not commensurate with, what calculus we have made about how much she should be grieving this death.
Yeah.
And I thought, and she was getting bullied which she didn't even tell me at the time. Like I found this out later. And I asked her, I said, why didn't you tell me? You knew I had the counselor on speed dial.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time advocating for her. And I said, why didn't you tell me? And she just looked at me and she said, Mom, because that's how grieving kids are treated. And that was the moment I'm like, you're right. And that is not okay. So I
No.
knew,
Oh, God.
that was kind of the moment. So I had my calculated exit, and I will say, I'm grateful to my mom. There was a life insurance policy that she left me, so I was able to quit my job. I had enough on that policy where I'm like, I've got 2 years to put
Oh,
myself back
okay.
together, get Katerina together, and
Yeah.
figure out if I can launch this thing. So during that all happened during COVID, I was taking any online training, calling other grief centers, talking to them about what the program looks like. I was like sitting here where I am now, learning all this stuff, taking notes. Katerina was behind me at the dining room table doing online school. It was like,
Yeah.
we had our our little workstation. Um, and I I would say things like, I just wish somebody would send me $100,000 check, and I could just get this thing started.
Yeah.
I thought, well, we're going to be in someone's garage or church basement, because that's how most of these organizations start.
Yeah.
And then a good friend of mine works in the schools, and she said, there are these grants of some of these COVID recovery funds. We should apply for some. So we did, and I thought, well, maybe I'll get one. And then I get notice that we got like 4 of them. And
Oh
so
my
it was
God.
like $150,000. And I had like
Wow.
6 weeks to start the center. They expected, I needed grief support
Oh,
groups at 8 schools. I didn't have a clinician. I had to find a curriculum. It was insane. Thankfully, I'd been at least exploring, what
yes.
was needed for this, but it was like this instant thing that then after all this preparation, like just had to happen so
Wow.
quickly. And I remember, my friend, we were on vacation together when I got the email. She's like, aren't you so excited? She's like, what's wrong? And I'm like, I'm terrified. I
Like,
don't
it
know how
is
to pull this
happening. It
off.
is happening now, whether I want it to or not. It is happening.
Yes. And many times in the last 3+ years, she has said to me, she'll be like, remember, you were the one who wanted this to happen, right? And I'm like, yes, I know. This is all good stuff. But
It's all fantastic. It's like
it
exactly
is.
how it's supposed to be. I mean, this was supposed to happen. It's crazy.
And again, I'm so grateful because Kentucky really was one of the last 4 states in the country that did not have any of these services.
Uh,
There's a national for these children's centers, and I'm so grateful that I was able to, start at the center. I'll give them a shout out, the McLean Fletcher Center in Jackson, Mississippi. They were just the most incredible, and it was mostly women, just nurturing. We loved that place so much, and I felt like they let us, kind of put ourselves back together over, those first few years, and just
yeah.
inspired me, to create that kind of space. I realized I kept trying to think, what was it that felt so good about that space? Like, why did I love being there? Why did Katerina love being there?
Hmm.
And I think if you boiled it down, for her and for me, everybody there got it. If you were upset that day, if you felt silly, you were crying, you were laughing inappropriately, like whatever was happening, everybody in that building understood where you were coming from, and it was all fine. I think also one of the things that I realized I appreciated about it, grief, I find, is one of the most universal and uniting experiences. So there
Hmm.
were folks in that, adult support room who, one of the richest families in Jackson, people who were on public assistance, grandparents raising grandchildren. It was like the most diverse set of people you could imagine, but we all had so much in common, and it was like uniting in our common struggle, support of each other, and common humanity. And
Yeah.
loved that, and that felt so healing to be in that place. And so, my goal in building this is to do that, where everybody from, the person who's lost somebody to cancer to the person whose, kids have lost a parent to overdose. I want everybody
Hmm.
to feel accepted and safe in there, and not
Yeah.
judged in whatever they're struggling with.
Yes. And you did it. You created it.
my, da- my daughter looks at me and like, about every 6 months she'll be like, Mom, I can't believe you just decided to do this and pulled it off. And I'm like, yeah, I frankly am shocked sometimes as well that it's, we just got another round of funding. We're expanding
Oh
our
my
school-based
God.
services.
Wow.
So it's, we're taking additional counties there. I'm ready to do like statewide policy stuff.
Oh my
There's so many
God.
things that I want to do with it. And, when you talk about, everything kind of has its purpose in your life experiences. And I really think about that a lot, because in doing this, I have literally had to draw on every single skill that I have ever learned in any scenario, like budgeting, management, like legal stuff, insurance, like all of, all the unfun stuff of nonprofits that's like, or why no one, gets excited about that aspect of founding a nonprofit, because you have to do all that stuff too, in addition to the
Yes.
mission based work. But I realized like every skill set, I used to have to do interviews for my job, and I'm like, I love doing interviews. I love talking about this stuff, advocacy,
Yeah.
thinking through policy stuff. The through lines of my career, in both very different careers, I realize are, I love connecting people with information and resources, and I'm like, well, that is what I do in
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
this work in just a very different way than
Yeah.
before. But I love this, and I think one of the things I'm so grateful. I've always needed to love my work and feel very passionate about it, and it had gotten to where in my previous life I had just lost that, and that made me sad. So
Yeah.
in discovering, even though I wish that it had not come about in this way, like discovering something I felt so passionate about. Honestly, I just thought, if I have all this knowledge and education about this topic that I didn't really want to have, but I got it now, and how can it help other people?
Yes.
So it's definitely a pay it forward kind of thing, because I think
Absolutely.
about all those people, who cradled us, especially in those first few years when we really needed it. And
Yeah.
it feels like sacred work in some ways to be able to do that for other families.
It's amazing. It's your story is really incredible. It is.